Your hands are still on the steering wheel when the question hits you. Not the usual license and registration routine people expect. Not even the classic, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" line everybody talks about online. Instead, the officer leans slightly toward the window, flashlight cutting across the dashboard, eyes moving faster than most drivers realize, and asks something that instantly changes the atmosphere inside the car. "Any weapons in the vehicle?" And right there, in that exact second, a surprising number of drivers destroy their own position without even understanding what just happened. Have you ever been asked that question during a traffic stop? And if so, how did you respond? Drop your answer in the comments, because most people think this question is simple until they learn what officers are actually listening for when they ask it. Stay with me on this one, because the truth behind this question is far more serious than most drivers understand. And later, I'm going to explain the hidden mistake that turns an ordinary stop into a legal nightmare faster than people think possible. A lot of Americans assume the "any weapons in the car" question is just about officer safety. And yes, partly it is. No honest person should deny that traffic stops can be dangerous for officers. Every cop approaching a vehicle has no idea who is inside, whether someone is nervous, armed legally, armed illegally, intoxicated, wanted, desperate, or completely harmless. But what many drivers fail to understand is that this question is also psychological. It is investigative, and in some situations, it is strategic. The moment the officer asks it, they are not only listening to your words. They are studying timing, tone, hesitation, breathing changes, hand movement, eye contact, facial tension, and even whether your answer matches your body language. That is the part people miss. Most drivers think the danger comes from giving the wrong answer. Sometimes the bigger danger comes from the way the answer is delivered. You can actually watch this happen during real roadside encounters. Somebody gets stopped for speeding. Simple stop. Nothing dramatic. Then the officer casually asks whether there are any weapons in the car. Suddenly the driver starts over-explaining. "No, sir, absolutely not. I would never carry anything like that. I'm not that kind of person. I was just coming from my friend's house and..." Now the stop changes. Why? Because nervous over-explaining immediately creates curiosity. Experienced officers are trained to notice behavioral spikes. They notice when a driver reacts harder to one question than another. And once suspicion grows, the stop often becomes broader than the original traffic issue. This is where many drivers accidentally trap themselves, especially lawful gun owners. Now, let's clear something up immediately, because this part matters. Laws about firearm disclosure vary massively from state to state in America. In some states, concealed carriers must inform officers immediately if they are armed. In others, disclosure is only required if asked directly. And in some places, there may be no duty to inform at all unless specific circumstances apply. That means blindly copying advice from random social media clips is dangerous. Very dangerous. One viral video tells people to say nothing. Another tells people to hand over the permit immediately. Another says, keep both hands visible and announce the firearm calmly. Another says, never mention weapons unless asked. And here is the problem. A tactic that works legally in Arizona might create problems in Ohio. Advice that sounds smart online might be completely wrong in North Carolina or Illinois. That is why smart drivers focus less on internet theatrics and more on remaining calm, lawful, and controlled. Because officers notice emotional instability immediately. And emotional instability changes the tone of a stop faster than almost anything else. One retired highway patrol officer once explained something interesting during an interview. He said, many drivers think police are mainly looking for contraband during roadside encounters, but often officers are first looking for behavioral inconsistencies. That matters more than people realize. A calm driver who answers directly and behaves predictably is usually easier to assess than somebody who suddenly becomes defensive, argumentative, or theatrical. And here's where things become legally dangerous. Some drivers panic and lie. That is one of the worst decisions possible. Imagine somebody legally carrying a firearm under state law. The officer asks if there are weapons in the car. The driver says no, because they think admitting it will automatically create trouble. Then the officer spots the firearm seconds later. Now, the entire interaction changes. Not because the gun was necessarily illegal, because the dishonesty became the issue. Suddenly, the officer starts wondering what else is untrue. Is the driver impaired? Are there additional weapons? Is there contraband? Does the driver have warrants? Has the firearm been used recently? Even if none of those things are true, suspicion expands rapidly once deception enters the encounter. And this is exactly why experienced defense attorneys constantly warn people not to turn routine stops into credibility disasters. Because credibility matters. A lot. Especially later in court. Jurors care about it. Judges care about it. Prosecutors care about it. And police reports absolutely care about it. Now, here's another part most people never think about. The weapon question is often used as a transition point. Watch traffic stop footage carefully, and you'll notice something. Officers frequently ask about weapons before moving into broader investigative territory. Any weapons in the car? No. Anything illegal I should know about? No. Mind if I take a quick look? That progression happens constantly, and drivers rarely notice how smoothly the conversation shifted from safety to consent. That word matters more than most Americans realize. Consent. Because many vehicle searches do not begin with dramatic probable cause discoveries. They begin with permission, verbal permission, nervous permission, confused permission, pressured permission. And later, drivers sometimes sit in disbelief, wondering why evidence found during a search is still admissible, even though they didn't really want officers searching the vehicle. The reason is simple. Courts often focus heavily on whether consent appeared voluntary, not whether the driver regretted giving it afterward. That distinction ruins cases, and officers know it. Now, before somebody misunderstands this conversation, let me be clear about something important. This is not about encouraging hostility toward police. That mindset is foolish. Aggressive roadside behavior usually makes situations worse, not better. But blind compliance without understanding your rights can also create enormous problems. The smartest drivers understand both realities at the same time. They remain respectful while also remaining aware. That combination is powerful. You'd be shocked how many roadside encounters spiral because drivers emotionally swing between two extremes. Extreme 1 is panic. Extreme 2 is ego. Both are dangerous. Panic causes rambling, contradictions, unnecessary admissions, and impulsive consent. Ego causes attitude, confrontation, sarcasm, sudden movements, and escalation. Neither helps you. Officers are trained observers. They pay attention to patterns ordinary people overlook. For example, many drivers think the officer is only listening to their answer when asked about weapons. Not true. The officer is also watching what your hands do immediately afterward. Do you suddenly reach toward the center console? Do you glance toward the back seat? Do your shoulders tighten? Do you touch your waistband? Do you look at a passenger before responding? Do passengers suddenly stop talking? Those details matter. And if you think officers are not mentally documenting these behaviors in real time, you are badly underestimating roadside policing. One former narcotics investigator described traffic stops as moving interviews. That phrase stuck with me because it explains everything. The stop begins before the officer even walks to your window. They already observed your driving behavior. They already watched how long it took you to pull over. They noticed whether you stopped in a safe area. They noticed sudden movements inside the cabin. They noticed whether passengers appeared frantic. By the time they ask about weapons, an internal assessment is already happening. And here's something many lawful drivers don't understand. Even completely innocent nervousness can accidentally create suspicion. That sounds unfair, but it's reality. Imagine a driver who hates police interactions purely because they're anxious, heart racing, voice shaky, hands trembling. To the driver, that reaction means fear. To an inexperienced officer, it might look like concealment behavior. Now combine that with inconsistent answers and the stop can escalate quickly. This is why controlled communication matters so much. Not performative internet lawyer speeches. Controlled communication. Short, clear, calm. Now, let's talk about one of the most misunderstood phrases during these encounters. Officer, I do not consent to searches. People online repeat that sentence constantly. And yes, legally, it can matter. But here's what nobody tells drivers. The tone surrounding that sentence matters enormously. Some people say it aggressively, like they're trying to win a dominance contest. terrible idea. Others say it calmly and respectfully. Huge difference? Because officers are human beings responding to human behavior in real time. Hostility changes interactions. Calmness changes them too. A respectful refusal sounds entirely different from an antagonistic one. And believe it or not, many officers expect informed drivers to decline consent searches. What escalates situations is often not the refusal itself, but the emotional energy surrounding it. Now, let's get deeper into why the weapons question creates so many legal disasters. The answer drivers give can lock them into narratives. That becomes extremely important later. Suppose somebody says there are no weapons in the car. Then officers discover a pocket knife under the seat. Maybe perfectly legal, maybe forgotten. But now the report says the driver denied possessing weapons. Again, credibility damage. Or maybe somebody says, just my licensed handgun. Fine. But later the officer reports the firearm was accessible beside open alcohol containers. Now the conversation becomes about impairment and access to weapons. Context changes everything, and people rarely think several steps ahead during stressful encounters. They focus only on surviving the moment emotionally. Officers, meanwhile, are often thinking about documentation, articulation, legal thresholds, and future courtroom scrutiny. That difference in mindset is enormous. Here's another reality most drivers never consider. Many officers deliberately ask questions they already partially know the answer to. That shocks people. But think about modern policing tools, license plate readers, dispatch information, prior stop history, vehicle registration data, observable evidence, passenger behavior, visible objects inside the vehicle. Officers frequently enter conversations with more context than drivers realize. So, when somebody lies casually thinking the officer has no way to verify the story, they sometimes walk directly into contradictions. And contradictions are investigative gold, especially in impaired driving cases. DWI investigations often begin with conversational inconsistencies, not dramatic evidence. One officer described it perfectly years ago. He said, impaired drivers frequently try too hard to sound normal. That creates unnatural conversation patterns. Too much talking, too much smiling, too much explanation, too much volunteering. Ironically, sober, innocent drivers sometimes make the same mistake because anxiety pushes them into performance mode. That's why simple, calm behavior matters. Now, there's another layer to this question that deserves attention. Some officers ask about weapons because they are preparing for a potential vehicle exit. And vehicle exits are legally significant moments. Once a driver exits the vehicle, officers may observe things previously hidden. Body sway, balance issues, waistband bulges, odor strength, pocket outlines, objects falling from clothing. Suddenly the stop transforms. This is especially important in nighttime stops. Darkness changes perception. Flashlights become investigative tools. People think officers use flashlights only to see. No. Flashlights also direct attention, control focus, reveal reactions, create visibility advantages, and yes, sometimes psychologically pressure drivers. That matters when weapons are involved. A flashlight beam hitting a driver's lap unexpectedly often triggers instinctive movement. Officers watch those reactions closely. Some movements appear harmless, others instantly raise alarm. Again, this does not mean every officer assumes guilt. But roadside policing depends heavily on behavioral interpretation. And behavioral interpretation is imperfect. That's why drivers must think carefully before speaking impulsively. Now, let me tell you about one of the biggest myths online. The myth that there is one magical sentence that automatically protects you during a traffic stop. That fantasy causes enormous damage. People watch dramatic clips online where somebody recites a rehearsed line and suddenly wins the encounter. Real life is messier, much messier. No single sentence immunizes you from investigation. No phrase instantly prevents arrest. No roadside speech guarantees officers stop asking questions. Reality depends on state law, facts, officer observations, probable cause standards, consent issues, and countless situational variables. That's why mature legal awareness matters more than social media theatrics. A calm, informed driver is usually in a far better position than somebody trying to imitate viral confrontation videos. And honestly, Some online advice is unbelievably reckless. You'll see people encouraging drivers to argue constitutional law on the roadside, like they're delivering courtroom closing arguments. Terrible strategy. The roadside is not the courtroom. Important distinction. You preserve issues legally through proper channels later, often through attorneys and court procedures, not emotional debates on asphalt beside moving traffic. The safest mindset during most stops is controlled cooperation regarding lawful commands while avoiding unnecessary self-incrimination. That balance matters a lot. Now let's circle back to the actual question. Any weapons in the vehicle? Why does this particular question make so many drivers nervous? Because people instinctively hear hidden implications behind it. Some hear accusation, some hear suspicion, some hear danger. Some hear opportunity to prove innocence. That last one is especially risky. Trying too hard to prove innocence often creates new problems. Over-explaining is dangerous because stressed people accidentally volunteer information unrelated to the stop. And once information enters the conversation, officers may pursue it further. For example, imagine a driver saying, "No weapons. I'm just exhausted because I was at a friend's party 2 hours away." Seems harmless, until the officer smells alcohol. Now the timeline matters, now the distance matters, now the fatigue statement matters, now the officer becomes interested in impairment. Small conversational choices create huge investigative openings. This is why experienced attorneys constantly emphasize disciplined communication, not silence in every situation. Disciplined communication. There's a difference. And by the way, passengers often make situations worse without realizing it. A nervous passenger blurting out random explanations can completely derail a stop. One person jokes nervously, another interrupts, another argues, another suddenly reaches for bags or pockets. Officers notice all of it. Traffic stops are dynamic environments where small behaviors carry disproportionate meaning. That's why experienced travelers, attorneys, and former officers often recommend reducing unnecessary movement entirely. Hands visible, movement slow, speech controlled, nothing dramatic. Because drama attracts scrutiny. Always. Now, here's something people almost never discuss. The emotional aftershock of traffic stops causes memory distortion. Drivers later swear they answered certain questions differently than body camera footage reveals. Stress affects recall. Adrenaline changes perception. That's another reason calmness matters. The more emotional the encounter becomes, the less reliable your own memory may be afterward. Meanwhile, the officer may have body cam footage, dash cam footage, radio logs, timestamps, and written reports. That imbalance becomes critical later if charges emerge. And this is where many drivers make catastrophic mistakes after the stop. They start talking to friends, to passengers, online, on social media, sometimes even posting recordings themselves. Without realizing prosecutors can access public statements. People accidentally contradict themselves constantly, especially after stressful encounters. Now, let's address another uncomfortable truth. Some drivers unknowingly consent through casual language. That surprises people. An officer asks, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, right?" Driver responds nervously, I guess that's okay." That may later be interpreted as consent. Words matter, tone matters, ambiguity matters. And once a search happens, reversing the damage becomes difficult, especially if evidence is discovered. This is why informed communication matters more than cleverness. Clever people often talk themselves into disaster because they think they can outmaneuver trained investigators conversationally. Bad assumption. Very bad assumption. Especially during DWI or narcotics investigations, where officers conduct these interactions constantly. Experience matters, repetition matters, pattern recognition matters, and officers develop instinctive reactions through thousands of roadside encounters. Now, does that mean officers are always correct? Of course not. Mistakes happen, bad stops happen, rights violations happen, false assumptions happen. But the smartest drivers prepare for reality, not fantasy. Reality means understanding that every word during a stop may later appear in reports, hearings, or court proceedings. That alone should change how people communicate. One defense attorney once explained that many cases are won or lost long before anyone enters a courtroom. They're shaped during roadside conversations, during nervous explanations, during impulsive admissions, during inconsistent timelines, during emotional reactions. And most people never realize the significance of those moments until later, far too late. That's why the weapons question matters so much. It is rarely just about the literal answer. It's about the totality of the encounter, behavior, consistency, tone, movement, reaction, context, everything together. And here's the part many viewers probably won't expect me to say. Sometimes the safest thing you can do is simply slow yourself down mentally. Not physically slow the stop down in a suspicious way. Mentally slow yourself down. Breathe before answering. Think before volunteering information. Avoid emotional performance. Avoid argumentative energy. Avoid trying to sound overly innocent. Because officers have heard every version of forced innocence imaginable. The goal is not to win the roadside interaction. The goal is to avoid making the situation worse. That mindset alone changes outcomes more than people realize, especially during late-night stops where fatigue, stress, alcohol suspicion, or fear already affect judgment. And if you remember nothing else from this conversation, remember this: most legal disasters during traffic stops do not begin with dramatic criminal masterminds. They begin with ordinary people making impulsive decisions under pressure, a nervous joke, a careless lie, an unnecessary explanation, a panicked consent, a sudden movement, a sarcastic remark, tiny moments, huge consequences. Because once suspicion expands, pulling it back becomes extremely difficult. And that's exactly why the seemingly simple question about weapons changes the atmosphere inside so many vehicles the second it gets asked.